Okay, good morning. Hemshech Chaim Beis. Volume 3. We are at the bottom of page 1232. So what we learned yesterday is further understanding the different impact of Binah and Chochma on the emotions, on the human being, with the key difference being that Binah gives birth to and then guides and refines the emotions, but does not transform them into something beyond their natural structure. Chochma, on the other hand, introduces bittul hamidus, which means elevating them to a different paradigm. So Binah is connected to is the level of yesh. What means yesh? It's about substance, about creation. It's about something that has structure. That's why Binah is called hasaga, understanding, like heseg yad, hasagas yad, like you can hold on to something, handles. Chochma, on the other hand, is just a nekuda, just a spark, a flash. And especially hanochas sichlis, the resonance, and riyah, the visualization, the clarity of Chochma. He explained also that that's why Binah is connected to simcha, which is expansive, expressive. And Chochma is eira, light, that just reflects its source. And eira, because it is communicating to another, because it's Chochma that's conveying, it's expressing to another. That's why it's eira, not eir. But still, like you said, ponim me'ires and ponim masbires. There's a illuminated face, an aura, a glow, and there's ponim masbires, a face that explains. Now, the truth is, ponim is not just face, it's also a method, a way of, like we say something is, it's a method, a way. But here there's the me'iris and masbiris. Okay. So therefore, Binah, on the contrary, Binah nailed him hamidis. From there come the birth of the Midos. And that's why Binah is called the mother of Em Habonim, Smecha Em Habonim. But at the same time, it gives birth to the emotions, but also, as he says, when the cognitive Binah is radiating, it also somewhat refines those emotions. Like he said, the klal hayudua, that the more concealment there is, the more the mitzias hayesh is due to concealment. The more revelation of the less yesh it will be. So the same is true with Binah and Midos. The Midos are their strongest, and you can say their most natural, let's call it their expression, is when the mind is not harnessing them. But the goal of Binah is to harness and guide them. Chochma, on the other hand, is not to give birth to the Midos, is to create bittul in the Midos. So Chochma is the level of Ayin, of selflessness, of bittul, of humility. Ayin ma be'etzem b'inyonahu lasis kol yesh la'ayin. That was the last thing we learned on the bottom of page 1232. Its inyan, its purpose, its function, its role is to make every yesh into an ayin. Binah, on the contrary, makes the ayin into a yesh. It takes chochma and turns it into a yesh, an understanding, and then it gives birth to emotions. And yes, emotions that are guided by the mind and refined by them. But Chochma turns it back into a state of ayin in the process of our growth and our development and our maturity. So Binah, you could say, is carrying it in order to create something, but then we have to go backwards. We go retrace the steps, as we've learned at length in Ayin Beis, to connect to the highest levels. And the biggest challenge is, what do you do with the emotions that are subjective? So we're learning now how the subjective emotions not only get guided toward higher ends and higher interests, not only do they get refined, but they also get transformed. You can be absorbed by an experience that's beyond your own subjective interest. And that's the whole thing we've learned about as we grow in godliness. First, God that's good for us, our life, our sustenance, our Father. Then a godliness that relates through existence. We come to realize God is greater than existence. Then a God that's completely beyond. In Pnimius HaMoichin, but still Binah. And Chochma, where we become completely absorbed in a reality that's beyond us. Our emotions as well. And then, as we said earlier, there's no sensation there. But you, the human being, has been uplifted to a whole completely different paradigm. Now he's going to discuss, continuing on, last line on page 1232, another aspect of the difference between Chochma and Binah, as far as how the Midos, what form and shape do they have when they elevate to this level of cognitive emotions. So he's going to say the difference is also, U'kamoi Kain, it's the last line in 1232. You can follow on ayinbeis.com if you want text. So he says like this, U'kamoi Kain, B'iskalus hamidas b'mkeiram. When these emotions are now being encompassed, you could say being dissolved, being absorbed in their source, harikamusha and klulim b'chochma, top of page 1233. Einam b'chinas mitzias klal, u'b'binah heim b'chinas mitzias davar. So he's now going to explain, what do the emotions look like? We know what they look like when they're in an emotional state. When you love something, it's pretty apparent what that looks like, what it feels like. You're drawn to something. You love something. You love someone. You're drawn to them. You feel the love in your heart. The love attracts you to that person or entity or idea, and you act in kind. Yira is also very clearly palpable, where you feel a certain either awe or restraint or respect, like we learned, even on a very basic level. You see something that's dangerous, you withdraw, you retreat. You see something that you're drawn to, you are attracted to. That's emotions. When you look at children, you see them very clearly. You can see the emotions, they wear them on their sleeves. They're very expressive. When you become an adult and you mature, the emotions are not going to be that quite expressive unless you choose to express it, because you're going to measure them. Not because you don't want to be emotional, because the emotions now are not just reflexive and impulsive, as we learned. So now the emotions are being guided. You don't just have a tantrum whenever you're not in the mood, whenever something hurts you. And you don't just, everything is much more guided and controlled. Again, this doesn't mean that an adult can't have an outburst in a good way, even of joy or pain. But we're talking about what we've been learning about the maturation and the development. Like you talk about an older person who's very composed. You can't just push their buttons and get them to just have an emotional expression. They're going to be thoughtful about it and reflective. But nevertheless, the emotions are there. So the question is, once you get to the levels of moichin, where we talked Ibur, Yunika, moichin, and we know that there are emotions there. We talked the Midos are becoming sichlim. In other words, they're becoming mature, not just your natural wiring, where when you put your, say, God forbid, a hand in fire, your emotions immediately, you're going to have a reflexive feeling. Once you've already gotten to the cognitive, the deliberate. So what do the emotions look like? So earlier we talked about the emotions. Do you feel them or don't you feel them? The sensation. When you're completely absorbed, you can be in a place where you don't even feel your emotion, even though it's there. You're excited, but you're not witnessing or experiencing excitement because you're part of the experience. Or you can be a little step away, and you actually feel something. You say, I really feel this, as we spoke about the difference between Chochma and Binah there too, where it's more murgashim, less murgashim. But now he's talking about the Skalos Hamidis. So he says, when they're kluli mechochma, ein b'chinas mitzias klal. The emotions no longer have a unique and distinct identity. That's what he means, ein mitzias klal. He doesn't mean that you become unemotional. There's no such thing as emotions. They don't have an independent form of expression because they've all become part of something greater and higher. In Binah, hein b'chinas mitzias davar. Because Binah is not about sublimating the bittul. Binah gives birth. And we said Binah as a yesh leaves space for the yesh of the Midos. That's why it doesn't transform them, like we said before. Like he said, the rule that anything, kol koyach meilid b'dei love, every faculty gives birth to something that's similar to it. Since Binah gives birth to the emotions have a certain similarity, there's a certain still substance. Binah is comprehending something. So the way the Midos are there, they're mitzias davar. There is an actual emotional element. There's an identity that they have. And he explains, like when a person comprehends an idea, in this comprehension, we're talking about hasaga now, bina. You have a midah. What does a midah mean? You have an inclination. We're not talking about necessarily, we're talking about an emotional expression. So yes, it's on an intellectual, cognitive level, but is the reason and the svara, the explanation, the theory, either to merit or to the opposite of merit. So go back to Shammai and Hillel. They're learning a subject matter. They're analyzing, they're studying something, a subject, whatever it may be. Whether it's Ketzad Meragdan Lifnei Akala that we learned before, how you dance, what you say when you're celebrating a kala, a bride, or other ideas. So because Shammai is natural inclination is Gvura, so we learned, obviously there are exceptions because he can go beyond that, Chochma. But we're talking about the Binah part of it. Through his understanding, because he's wired a certain way, his understanding is always looking and finding the lack of merit, the lechoiv, why it's not permitted. Or in a case, like you say, a judge sitting in a bezdin, in a court of law, he will see the more critical eye. Someone who's coming from a chesed point of view will see it more in a lenient way. And this isn't about one being right or wrong. They just have two ways to look at it. You could look at something and say, okay, I see the merits in it, or I can see the opposite of merits. What's the opposite of merit in English? Whatever the word is. Okay. So what do you see in this? That Binah is not devoid of chesed and gvura. It's true. It's not that the Shammai is starting to get up and you see yira or gvura in his behavior, but his behavior, as we learned before, and his thinking is aligned with that emotion. And he says, that means in the understanding, the reasoning, and the explanation, you're looking to find the reasons that are either from l'schus or l'chayv. So in other words, in the hasaga, there is a mitzias, a ba midah b'mitzias. This midah of chesed or gvura, which is either a kinder approach or a more strict approach, is there in a very tangible way. You're not talking about the truth of the idea. You're talking about what is the idea going to, what is the svara and the reasons lead to. Is it to merit or to the opposite of merit? Or in the case of asr or mutter, is it permitted or is it not permitted? Ukamay spila sichli shebasogav is bonus is now this is in the process of a cognitive process of Binah. Now he's explaining it in avoided terms. Like the cognitive excitement that comes from understanding and contemplating that you're contemplating on a divine idea, a divine level, whatever it may be, Atzilus, Eris, and Kalim. So he says, Harigam koidim shemispal belev. Also, before he actually has an emotional in the heart, an emotional attraction, emotional stimulation or arousal, how do you mispal besichle by inyan aliki? There's an arousal or stimulation in the mind. Now, what's the distinction between the two? This goes back to what we learned from chapter 16 in Tanya. Your mind can get excited about an idea and say, this is a great idea. I love it. But it still not means that's an emotion in your heart. It's an intellectual excitement. It's the Midos shebeseichel. And how do we know that? Because you may not even be drawn to it. After you finish, you move on to something else. It hasn't necessarily impacted you that you say, I need to own this, or I need to become part of this. Your mind tells you it's great, and you get excited. Or it tells you it's terrible, and you say it's, and your mind's stimulation is that this is something you should avoid. But it doesn't necessarily impact the actual emotions. Like he says in chapter 16, it's betalumes lev. The mind and the heart sense that this is right and wrong, but it's not like you could say, I got excited. Like when, for example, when you really love something in emotions, not just intellectually, you're going to act on it. It's more than just acting. That's not necessarily the right term I wanted to say. You're going to act on it, but also you're going to feel a palpable attraction to it. Intellectual stimulation doesn't necessarily mean you're drawn to it. It means that you, in concept, say this is an excellent thing. And this is a vital point in Chassidus, especially in chapter 16 in Tanya and other places where the Alter Rebbe is making it clear that even if someone is not yet at a place where they can get excited, v'haftas Hashem elekecha, that they're actually just as excited they are about being intimate with their spouse, or just as excited they are about some other physical pleasure, that they actually feel that pleasure, but your mind can at least take you and say, this is worthy of having pleasure in. And that's also a level. Now, he's not necessarily referring right here to chapter 16. I'm just using it as an example. But he wanted to distinguish between Techila Tivim and Sichlim. I don't want to use that expression either. Between something that is in the mind, the Midos shebeseichel get excited, even before the heart is palpably feeling this motion. In his mind, he gets excited. That is an emotional expression, but it's an emotion in the mind. This is Binah. And explaining what's the difference, he says, in the mind, it's far more subtle and refined by Yispailu Shebelev, from the excitement or the arousal and the stimulation in the heart, which of course takes on far more tangible and far more concrete form. But nevertheless, you can't say there's no excitement. Nevertheless, he's been excited also in Seichel. Chassidus talks about this in many places, about people get excited about something, but it doesn't come into their emotional realm, meaning emotions in their emotions. You know, the expression tibtum halev, which means the heart is blocked. You can see people get excited about something. You can learn Chassidus and get very excited about it, but it doesn't mean it translates into a true emotional connection to whatever it is that you got excited about. It remains somewhat, I don't want to say theoretical, but it remains somewhat on a mind level and not on a purely emotional level. So now he says, V'harizeh, this emotions as they are in the mind, like a fetus in its mother's womb. Hariyesham kol tzir havlad. So we're talking about, of course, a fully developed fetus. You have the entire structure, the entire shape and structure of the child. B'tzir Evarov, in the shape and form of its limbs. In other words, just a full-blown child. Hakol k'moshe bo achar kach bizgalus. Yesham kol tzir avla b'tzir Evarov hakol k'moshe bo achar kach bizgalus. Exactly as it will afterwards come into once the child leaves the womb, and we'll see it in a very revealed way to the naked eye. Rakshahu b'katnus ma'id. So everything is there, but it's in a miniature form. Okay, so that is the Midos shebebina. So let me just unpack, let me just spell it out. And now he's going to go over to what Chochma is like. So the Midos and Binah, he says, there's something, a tangible stimulation, but it's an intellectual one. And the comparison is like the child in its mother's womb, which is Binah. Aim Abonim, remember, Aim Abonim. Binah is the Ima, the mother. But the Midos, which is the Bonim, are still within the womb. So it's all there, but it's still in the mother, part of the mother, like we say, Uber Yerachimai. The fetus is still a part of the mother. In this case, the emotions are part of Binah. So they're there. Just as, and they look exactly like when they come out, but when they're obviously when they're revealed, that's when they become the emotions in the heart. But they're there in a miniature form. I'm not sure why he's saying katnus ma'id, because even when the child is born, it's katnus ma'id. I think it's probably saying that in the pregnancy it's the same child, but maybe even more miniature than in birth. Maybe. I'm not sure what that katnus ma'id is. But regardless, whether a newborn or a baby or in the mother's womb, they're both in a miniature form. But it's still a uber, so it's still concealed within the ima, in the case here, and within Binah. So to say there's no emotions, you cannot say. That's why he called it on top of the line. But Binah, the emotions are metzias dover. So to use the example of Shammai and Hillel, and then we'll move to the next. Shammai and Hillel, when they learned the subject matter, so Shammai saw in it the more stringent aspect, the Gevura. Hillel saw the Chesed. But as good and excellent sages and teachers, they, at that point, can't get excited about it. When a judge in a court of law is sitting in judgment, and let's say a three-judge tribunal, like a Besdin, and they hear a case being made that this person is guilty of some crime. Then the defense comes and they present, no, the person is not guilty. So they hear arguments back and forth, and as they come to a conclusion, after they hear all the evidence, we're talking about everything ethically and so on, they're not personally invested, or else they'd have to recuse themselves. They can't have an emotional connection, like, this is my son or my brother, then they can't be a judge. They have to be objective and impartial, listening to all the arguments. But then there comes a point where the arguments, they sit and after all the evidence and witnesses present, they come to a certain clarity, and one judge says, this person is guilty. Guilty is gvura. But it's not an emotional gvura. It's not in the heart. It's not the judge feels anger to this person or feels that this person deserves to be punished. Intellectually, the arguments came to a conclusion that this is gvura. The one who comes and says not guilty has come to an intellectual process of chesed that no, we have to find merit, or you don't have enough proof to find them guilty. Proven until guilty, and innocent until proven guilty. All this is not emotional. Emotional as in the belev, hispilus belev. Afterwards, you could say, once the judgment has been passed, you could say that a judge may feel something that now, a relief that this person really deserved to be not guilty, or this person deserved to be guilty. The truth is, judges shouldn't even have that. But you could then say that an emotional reaction is when you personalize it and you subjectively feel. Now, that's possible only after the court has ruled. If the judges feel that way before, we have a problem. I'm just trying to explain the difference between hispilus sichli and hispilus levavis, hispilus hamidus, shebelev. So the seichel has come to a chesed approach, but it's still ultimately intellectual. So Binah has midas, but they're like, that would be a state of pregnancy from the emotional point of view, not the intellectual point of view. When midas is when you actually personalize and you feel, like he says, in the seichel is bedakas harbi yeser. It's far more subtle. The chesed and the intellectual level is not an emotion that expresses itself in a subjective way. It's still a seichel dika hergish, but it is a hergish. It is, in other words, a midah. Now you could say, 1 second, is there a seichel that doesn't have midas? Yes, there is. First of all, Chochma, as we're going to learn, doesn't have midas altogether, or at least not in any tangible way. Or you could also learn something and not have chesed and gvura. You can learn an idea, you're just learning it for learning purposes. It doesn't always have to have a midah in the seichel. It's only when you start coming to conclusions, then you say, you know what, I just learned the Gemara, and based on that Gemara, this is allowed, it's not allowed, it's chesed or gvura. So you could have an intellectual process without a midah. But the case where we're talking now, where Binah comes to an understanding where you do have a leaning toward one or the other, an inclination, like he says, chesed or gvura, so the midas are there and mitzias davar, but they're still in a state of Binah, not in a state of midas shebelev. Now, I can stop here, or I can just, let's contrast it with Chochma. If somebody wants to ask something.
I want to ask something. What does the spilus seichel mean? The spilus by its very nature, you're talking about the Dayan, the judge, and so at that point he has a spilus. I thought a spilus itself means excitement, and you described it as something not excitement, but very, very rational.
Yeah, his spilus doesn't mean always excitement. The spilus means stimulation. There's a stimulated reaction. In other words, when the judge is coming to understanding chesedic, so the spilus sichlis means the mind is coming to a particular inclination, which is a chesed inclination. That can later translate to an emotional excitement. Right now, it's an intellectual excitement. It's like being excited about an idea. This idea is unbelievable. You could even physically feel excited, but it's not an excitement that is personal in the sense where this is like my experience, like me, like, you know, imagine the difference we spoke about, the difference between, let's say, the family of this person, they hear that he's been acquitted. They have a spilus that's emotional. That's not his spilus sichli. For the judge, it was the mind came to the conclusion that this person is zoicha, is meritus, whatever the word is, merituous, is of merit.
Meritorious.
Meritorious. The family gets excited personally. The judge doesn't take it personally. He moves on. He has a lot of other things to do. That would be the difference. So his spilus means here that it's not pure seichel that doesn't have any expression in we'll call it chesed or gvura, toward merit or to the opposite of merit. That would be the difference. Similar, just as an example, even though this example is used for das, but it would be like let's say you're reading a letter and it's not about your father, that your father, God forbid, if someone's father died. The person who faints or gets hurt by it is going to be the person who its father is. You'll read it in your mind. You'll feel sad for the person, like we feel sad for someone. But you can't say it's necessarily a sadness that's in your heart. Your mind, you feel empathy. You feel sad that somebody suffered a tragedy. Now, you could have empathy to the point where you actually feel that other person's pain, but you could also have it intellectually that you understand it's a painful thing and you feel empathy and sadness, but it's still sadness in your mind. It's not personal to you. That would be another example.
That's still spilus. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Now, you can have a level of seichel where there's no ispilus. Like I said, you're learning a subject, and you know what? Someone will say to you, you like this, you don't like it? You say, I don't really have I'm just learning it. There's no, there's no excitement, even intellectual excitement. You can have that as well. Okay, so that's, the example is the fetus in the mother's womb. That would be the Midos in Binah, Ima. What about the father? So he says, Mashenkim b'tipas ha'av. Remember, the child, the fetus develops in the mother's womb. The tipas ha'av is the seed, the tipa, the drop, the seed that the father provides, that fertilizes the egg, that ultimately creates conception of a child. He says, Hagam sheyesham havlad behelam. And this is very much, if you know chapter 2 in Tanya, which I just finished learning on Tanya Applied, so I'm quite in the middle of the subject. So he says there that in the tipa is like a seed. When you look at a seed in the ground, let's say a seed, an apple seed, you're not going to see an apple in there, but it's clearly an apple seed. It's not an orange seed. So within it lies the potential of everything that will come. So the semen, the drop of semen, the seed of the father is not just a drop of water. It has in it the power of life. And that's why it carries the DNA and the very genetic code of the father. So in Tanya, I just want to clarify something, because something people make a mistake. He says the child comes from the etzem tipas moyach ha'av. So in Torah, the Alter Rebbe says clearly, we're not talking gashmis. Some people think it means that in the old age, when people didn't know better scientifically, that they thought that there's a piece of the brain of the father that travels through the spine, turns into a seed, into semen, which is the life. So it's actually a piece of the brain. So Alter Rebbe says there, if that was the case, then the brain would be diminished if it's a physical thing. So he says, no, it's a spiritual thing. It's the mind being carried into the seed. So the seed has the genetics. He doesn't say that word, of course, genetic code. But the Rebbe actually brings, when he explains it, he says it's like the concept of ein kishrei ela b'das. A person cannot be stimulated, a man, unless they're concentrating. I'm talking about sexually stimulated. So ein kishrei ela b'das. What does that mean? What does das have to do with a physical organ? Is because the mind impacts us. Even though the mind itself is not the organ, but for example, your mind can tell you to now, let's say, tighten your muscle. The mind is speaking to your muscle, but not that the mind has a muscle in it. So in other words, the mind carries messages and signals that affect the rest of the human being. In the case of giving birth, we're not just talking about an action, you're talking about the very DNA and the genetic code of the parent, of the father, is being carried through the seed. The seed in turn fertilizes an egg, an ovary, and and God blesses it with a soul. A child is conceived, a fetus begins to develop. So he's saying the tipas moyach ha'av has in it, like he says, kol havlad, hagam sheyesham havlad, not kol havlad, hagam sheyesham havlad behelam. He doesn't mean there's a child inside the seed, obviously. He means the ingredients and the genetic material that's going to shape this child. Behelam, even though it's there concealed, just like an apple tree is concealed within the seed of an apple seed. It's not there, there's nothing existent. It's not like Binah, where you have an actual fetus in the mother's womb. You have actual Midos, meaning actual chesed and gvura on an intellectual level, even though it's not yet a born emotional midah in the heart. In the Chochma and the tipas moyach ha'av, you don't have any mitzias. There's no child altogether. It's not like you open up the mother's womb or you take a sonogram, you see there's a child there. If you dissect a seed, the seed of the father, you're not going to find anything there. as a mitzias. Okay, he uses the word hiyuli. Hiyuli is a word which is, one word to translate means potential, but it doesn't mean potential as in like something has potential that will later be actualized. It means it's in a state. It would be like exactly like a seed. Real potential, we'd say, is not even a seed. The potential to have a apple seed. But here you have something, but it's also not, you can't call it something as far as the product goes. So we call it hiyuli. She'enu b'mitzias adayin. It's essentially a state before a next state of through a metamorphosis that develops. So when you say something is b'koyach, that's a potential. That would be like saying, I see this person as the potential to be a very big business, a very wealthy man. You have the potential. That doesn't mean that you have wealth inside of you and it's just in a concentrated form and just needs to now develop. It means you have potential. When you say hiyuli, you're saying there's something there, but you can't call it yet the product that it will become. So we call it hiyuli. You don't say when a child is in pregnancy, you don't call that hiyuli. The child is there. It's developing, it's growing. And then when it comes out of its mother's womb, it becomes revealed. So you say much more helam and gilui. When you say hiyuli and bepoil is more like the seed of the father and the child and the child that will emerge, the child personality that will emerge from that.
Does it mean potential? Is that how you're translating it?
More like an archetype.
I just explained. There's two different ways to understand potential. There could be potential, like somebody has the potential to become a billionaire, or potential other things. And here we're talking about that something exists and it's in a potential state because you don't yet have the product, as opposed to a child in its mother's womb, for example, where there is the product, it's just not revealed.
So like nascent?
I don't know if I can have I mean, all these words can work. You just have to understand the concept. I don't want to get stuck in any word because I think it's a combination of several words to understand the idea. The best example would be whatever word you want to use, that works. But it's basically, like he's saying here, it's the apple tree within the seed, the apple seed, the child within the seed of the father. What word would you want to use for that?
It's completely non-physical. I think that's where we learned it, and I think we use the word archetype. When
we use archetype. We have used archetype. Here I don't want to use archetype because it's not an archetype really, because there is a seed, that there's actual tipa. We're not talking about the potential of a seed. We're talking about the actual, there is, when you take the semen of a father, there's something there. You can inseminate an egg with that, and it will give birth to something. It can conceive.
But that's not the Yuli, is it? The Yuli is completely non-physical as far as
it depends. Yuli is used in different contexts. It depends. First of all, he says Kemo Hiyuli. Hiyuli is a term used in different ways. It's generally speaking, it's more than just, let's say, that my power to write and then I write. That's more Helam and Gilui, Nelam, Koyach and Poil. It's less than that, but it's more than saying something like Yesh Ma'ayin. Yesh Ma'ayin. God has the power to create, but you don't call that Hiyuli. That's a koyach. He has the power to create, and then he creates. Hiyuli is where you already have something in process, but it's not yet in a shape and form that you can say it's just like two stages. It's still in a stage that is more, I call it potential state, whatever word you really want to use. I don't have an exact word, to be honest. I'm just trying to explain it. Okay. But in contrast to Binah, it's very clear the difference between the two. How the child is within the seed and how the child is within the mother's womb. And we're not talking about the ovary. The ovary and the egg, you could say, is similar to the seed. because at that stage, the ovary has not been fertilized and also has the potential. But I've not seen that spoken about in Chassidus so much. Chassidus usually talks about tipus moyach ha'av and then the development through pregnancy. Okay, anybody want to ask anything? Because now he's going to bring it back to the difference between the Midos within Binah and the Midos within Chochma. But let's anything you want to clarify? Okay. Ukamoyken hu Midos. The B'chinas is Binah. Now, once we made this contrast, he says, and the same thing is with the emotions within the state of Binah, Ima, the mother. Binah, the Hasaga, where you have a Chesed and a Gvura, intellectually. Ukameshakosov, it's Feincha Timale Bitnam.
What's a funcha?
It's a funcha. Timale Bitnam. What does sefuncha mean here? That which is concealed? Like tzofin? Sefuncha? Or from the word
Hidden.
sipa?
Safun. Hidden.
Hidden, yeah. You know Rab Shlomo, do you know the actual tights in the Pasuk?
It's in Tehillim. I think in Perek Lamed Beis.
Anybody has an English Tanya that they can look up quickly? What this means, the actual physical meaning, the actual pshat in the pasuk. No, I can look it up. What capital do you think it is? You know what? I'll just look up by Hebrew.
It's
Tessayan, maybe.
It is Tessayin.
Okay, I'm
At
looking
the
it up
end.
right now. I think it's Yud Zayin Yud Daled.
Correct.
Yeah, let me see the English translation. Yeah. He says, whose portions and whose belly you fill with your treasures. Svancha. Okay. I guess the hidden treasures. Yeah, Tamale Bitnam is for sure. Yeah.
Your treasured ones is how Safaria translates it.
Yeah. Okay, so he says like this. V'tzifeincha, you said?
What's funcha?
Utzfuncha. Utzfuncha tamali bitnam, that you fill their stomach with treasure. So bitnam is like the belly, is like the womb. Shu b'chinas milui b'chinas mitzias. So in other words, it's still in a state of concealment, but it's being filled with something. That means there's something there. There's something that's existent. To commission is barley ill. Dibra mas rosh amatis aleph. I'm just looking inside what's there. Samar Gimel. Wow, that's a long time ago.
It's a question that we focus on every single morning when we come to school. Because while we're busy with daily routine, there's a big question. The big question.
Rav Shlomo, can you please mute your phone?
Yeah. On page 63, just give me a second. I want to see quickly what it says there. Oh, actually, I referred to this the other day. This was the mimer I referred to where he talks about the difference between Chochma and Binah. Yeah, he talks about the whole thing with Chesed and Gvura within Binah. Okay. Okay, so that's Binah. But how these emotions are in Chochma, they're not at all in a state of, you can call them substance or structure. And this is the reason now he says, and that's why when it's still the spark of an idea, the point, it can go many different ways. Like when Shmaya and Avtalion taught, they were the teachers of Shammai and Hillel. So they taught an idea. So Chassidus explains the idea still was amorphous. That's why Shammai could take the Gvura from it and Hillel the Chesed. In other words, when the idea is still in its very, what's the word I want to use, nebulous state of a Nakuda, that it's not really developed into details, you can go different directions. So you don't yet have, in Binah, on the other hand, when you're comprehending it and breaking it down into details, that's when you start developing different theories, so to speak. To Chesed, to Gvura, right, wrong. So that's why in Chochma, the words is Chochma. That's why Yechel love become from Shemashenken Hasoga the Binah. And by contrast, in contrast to the comprehension of Binah, where it starts taking on shape. Okay. You may recall, maybe you don't recall, this goes back around halfway through the volume 2. There's a whole section on Ur Mayim Rakia. Ur Mayim Rakia is a Kabbalistic process of development of something going from a stage of more subtle state to a more substantive state. So Ur is the most ethereal of the three. Mayim, think of Ur as gas, liquid, and solid. That's a good comparison of Ur Mayim Rakia. Ur is still ethereal, it's light, energy. Mayim is fluid, it's liquid. And Rakia is called Iglidu Mayu when the liquid has solidified, like ice. So if you take water, you have gas, liquid, solid, or ice. Rakia, even though Rakia for us is still somewhat unshaped, but Rakia compared to Mayim, according to Kabbalah, Chassidus, and Chazal, Rakia is like gelled water, or what I say before, solidified. When I say there's a word that I want to use, what's the word? When something starts becoming a solid, there's a word for it in English.
Congealed?
Yeah, congealed. Yeah. Yeah. Gets congealed. So, Ayur Mayim Rakia, the Maya Naida, water is mobile. Naida means it's fluid. Bahainu, the Nekudas HaChochma Yechelim Levina B'Kama Efanim. So this we learn more at length. Chochma is like fluid. It's not yet solidified in one way or another. That's why it says like fluid, like water. You can understand an akud in many ways. Like if somebody who is a great, conceives of a brilliant idea. It's just an idea, a spark of an idea, and they present it. You could have two different people have very different ways of developing that same idea. So that nekuda can be understood like water can flow in many different directions. Including in opposite directions, in opposite ways. One person could take from the nekuda chesed, and one person could take gvura. One person can take and can come to one conclusion, another to a very opposite conclusion. A rekia, like he says, a glidu maya, which is congealed water. That's where the word glider comes from, ice cream. It means it's frozen, or congealed at least. The kasher baba asaga de binah. So here, mayim is chochma, rekia is binah. When it comes in the comprehension of Binah, here it gets congealed in a certain shape. The way he understands it, that's how it remains, and it doesn't change. Now, obviously, you can argue 1 second. Binah cannot change. It can. But compared to Chochma, Binah is already giving shape to it. So once you come to a full development of the idea, this is its development. Obviously, you can go back to the drawing board and make another Binah, create another form of understanding. But we're talking now that once it's turned into a Binah form, V'hainu, and the reason for this is, and V'hainu means, L'fisha Chochma b'chinas Ayin. Chochma is still in a state of Ayin, which is substanceless. Since in a state of ayin, without substance, that's why it can come in different ways, because it's musl, it still negates any tzir, any structure and substance, any shape and form.
Why are you calling it mayim? Why aren't you calling it or instead of mayim chochma?
That's how it's explained everywhere. That or is keser, mayim is chochma is compared to mayim, and bin is compared to rakir. That's how it is. That's the way Kabbalah and Chassidus explain it.
It's hard for me to jump from one to the other. Okay.
So since it's mushlo, it negates, it repels yet, it's still not yet in any form of shape and form. It comes in different shapes, and in different forms of revelation. And then in the parentheses, he says even more, and all these different interpretations, all these different forms are all true. Because the ayin of Chochma also encompasses chesed and gvura, except it's not shaped yet as a chesed and gvura. It's not schus or chiyuv. It's not merit or the opposite of merit. Because from chesed and gvura comes these different approaches. And they're all emes. Like it says elsewhere, be'inyan, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. When it talks about Shammai and Hillel, it says two different opinions. Elu ve'elu, these and these are both the words of the living God. So in Chochma, that's what dominates. Everything is emes because it has not yet taken on any shape and form. Binah, and by contrast, Binah, liyes, sheba b'chinas mitzias b'tzir kach v'kach, since it's coming to a structured way of thinking, like this and like this, specifics, ef shalishtanus, that's incapable of changing. Okay, I mean, I'd like to read further, but it's already, I want to stop here. The topic is like we're middle of a sentence, really. Should I just read it quickly? I'd have to read till the end of the paragraph, really, to get this clearly. I'll read it quickly and I'll explain tomorrow. So I'm just going to read like that. So he says, the kamoy kein hugam, the b'chinas hamidas shebehem. So just like we explained the difference between Chochma and Binah, where Chochma is fluid, meaning it's still in an amorphous state, Ayin, and can go in different directions. And Binah is a solidified state. It's clearly understood in a certain way. So also the Midos within them are different in that sense. The Keshabah Ba'asaga, when the Midos are coming, once you come to a level of understanding, then the Midah comes either this or that. And will not change it again. Like the person, let's say the judge who's sitting in judgment says, I am bimazaka, I am finding this person what do we say? Meritorious. Okay. This is an expression from Chazal. Ani amazaka mazaka ani. So that's where he's now. The judge has ruled. His asaga, his understanding brought this to a situation of merit. That's his inclination. When it's still in that nekuda state, it could change. Like we learned earlier in the Maimer Nosei Aleph, meaning the first Nosei, there are several Noseis in Ayin Beis. The Shama v'Hil Shneim Kiblu Marav Echad, like I said before. Shama and Hil both received from one teacher. The Zed Kibul Lekula, and one of them received in a more lenient way. The Zed Lechumra, and the other one took out the message a more stricter way, interpretation. So a lenient interpretation is stricter from one teacher. Now you must say that the theory of the teacher had in it both chesed and gvura. But there they're not at all a shaped existing entity. And the best proof is because we see to the extent that one understood the idea leheter, to permit, and the other one to prohibit. And this means this one proved and said he took his teacher's theory and he was mechiach, means he proved from that theory that's lekula, lenient, v'zeh, the opposite. The other one Shammai took the same theory and he proved from it l'chumra. So you have to say that the theory had both possibilities. V'shnei emes, like he said in the previous parentheses, both are true. Be'etzem hasvara, or be'etzem hasbara. Shekel shneim. Both are true in the very core idea, as stated by the teacher of Shammai and Hillel. It encompasses both of the possibilities. Eliezer built the Metzias klal, and because it was not at all in any form of shape and form of Metzias, it can change and even the word replace, be replaced. Same thing, the child, from the perspective of the seed of the father, it can change from male to female, or the opposite, vice versa. And after 40 days, after 40 days of pregnancy, once the child gets shaped, it can no longer change. So he's saying when it's still the tipus ha'av, you cannot know whether it be male or female. It can go both ways. But once the child is shaped in the mother's womb, in Binah, in Ima, after 40 days, it will be either male or female, and that's that. It becomes established. Okay. We'll explain this more in detail, but it's pretty clear as it is. The difference between Chochma and Binah, and the difference between the Midos, the children, so to speak, the child, the offspring of Chochma and Binah, as they are in Binah, they are Metzias, and a Chochma, they're not a Metzias at all, as he just explained. Okay, so we'll stop here at the end of this paragraph. Any questions, my friends? All clear?